This is an emergency plea to Tudor. Can't you just make this watch again? Let's get into it. Yes, and welcome to the Mad Watch Collector Show. Right, so we got to go back to 1953 when we saw the first Rolex Submariner. And after a good year of letting it be on its own, Rolex decided to bring out the Tudor Submariner. Pretty similar, the only thing different is the dial and the movement. This is because from the very first inception of Tudor, founder Hans Wilsdorf wanted to come up with a watch that had all the refinement, technology and robustness of a Rolex, but make it more affordable by taking off-the-shelf movements instead of in-house ones. So basically a working class Rolex. And you can't get a better example of that than this 1953 marketing poster. Apparently the best watch for coal miners back in 1953 was a Tudor Oyster Prince. Anyway, when it comes to the Submariner, over the next couple of decades, throughout the 50s and most of the 60s, these watches stayed looking similar. However, the 60s was when the Tudor Submariner was issued to militaries all around the world, and it was starting to get a good name for itself as a very rugged and relied upon tool. But it was the year 1969 when things really started to look a little different, with the reference 7016, the snowflake dial. Oh, yes, with the help from the Marine Nationale, the French diving corps, a new dial was born. More readable, more legible, and most importantly, easier to read under murky waters. Now, this was huge for Tudor because it meant them stepping out of the shadow of Rolex and having their own identity. Now, the watch I'm showing you today, right now, right here, look at it, is the Tudor Submariner 9411/0. And this was the Mark II of the Submariner Snowflake. Now, this watch I have for you today is loaned into me from Spencer at That Watch Guy London, who is also the owner of BQ Watches, a fantastic place for you to buy pre-owned luxury watches. They don't just do nearly new. You can find some amazing vintage pieces there. So go check out the website. This 9411 was made in 1977. This watch looks incredible. It doesn't seem as though it's been polished. You can still see the chamfers. If you take a closer look at this watch,
it's got Rolex all over it.
The case is a Rolex Submariner. We also have a Rolex triplock crown. It's a serrated edged Rolex bezel. The bracelet, look at the clasp. We've got a Rolex clasp. The case back is interesting because this is Tudor. Rolex never had this engraving or the sloped chamfer at the edge. But at that time in the 70s and now, you could not and still cannot buy a Rolex Submariner that had a blue dial or a blue bezel in stainless steel. And even though the watch is in pristine condition, look at the patina to it. Let's go outside in. First, looking at that bezel insert, it's aluminium. And for all those that have ceramic inserts, like it or not, your bezel's not going to fade like that. This is what's known as a ghost color. It's a faded, misty version of its former self. When we take a deeper, closer look at that dial, you can see how that matte texture is starting to bubble, and it's absolutely awesome. Take a look at the lume on the handset. Now, unfortunately, 40, 50 years on,
the lume is Kaputski,
but you get this amazing orangey yellow patina, as the handset and markers would have been white, brand new. Now, you guys know I'm a bit of a bezel freak. I love twisting a bezel. Now, in the 70s and right up to the end of the 80s, Rolex and Tudor Submariners had a friction-only bezel. So you could turn it bi-directionally, which is And just like when I had the 5513 in my hands, these watches feel fragile, you know? And makes me appreciate just how far we've come with our modern watches.
Could you just click that like button, please? It really helps the channel. Thank you.
The dimensions are spectacular. The case is 39mm with a slightly protruding bezel, 47 lug to lug, just under 13mm thick. We've got a gorgeous plexi domed crystal protecting that dial. It's acrylic based. That's what they all were back in the days. And I love it because you just can't get a boxy domed sapphire look like it. Inside we've got an ETA 2784 movement. It's automatic. It has a beautiful sweep of 28,800 beats per hour, which is fantastic for 1977. And it also has a quick set date, something that wasn't very common back in those days. To still see this watch purring away at 28,800 beats per hour, almost 5 decades after it was made, it is truly special. What an absolute stunner! Now in modern times, Tudor as a company were going, it wasn't until the late 90s they stopped using Rolex parts. The reference 9411 was replaced by the 79090. It was going for 14 years, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, the later version didn't have the snowflake handset anymore and more resembled the Rolex Submariner again. Obviously, sales of the snowflake weren't doing great, so let's attach ourselves more to that Rolex again to bump up the sales. But by the 2000s, Tudor were really. But in 2013, they came out with a reference that not only saved the brand, that now, 10 years later, has propelled Tudor to being one of the dominant forces in Swiss luxury watches, and that was the Black Bay, this bad boy. And it was basically an homage to everything good about the Rolex and Tudor Submariners of the last 50 years. The Pelagos, a beautiful tool watch. It's quite big, 42mm, made with titanium, and it's very modern. Even though it does have the snowflake handset and the dial, it's a little bit too modern for me. Tudor were now making their own calibers, and in 2018 brought out the Black Bay 58. To this day, my favorite dive watch ever, basically just a smaller version of that initial first Black Bay. Tudor then came out with the FXD, a fixed bar Pelagos that again was a little bit too big for me. The bezel is very busy and just doesn't look enough like this 9411. Then amazingly, Tudor brought out a watch that has the closest resemblance to an old Tudor and Rolex Submariner in the Pelagos 39. This watch is a tooly thing of beauty, riding the wave of the Black Bay 58 but using the snowflake dial as the main signature. Like I said, Rolex do not sell a watch that is blue with a blue bezel in stainless steel. So for me, it is a no-brainer that a 39mm stainless steel blue Tudor Submariner with a snowflake dial should be coming out imminently. I love my Black Bay 58 blue because for me, it's the closest blue to this 9411. Now, if they took the Black Bay 58, gave it a serrated bezel and not a coin edge, gave the case some crown guards, changed the markers to blocks, and to make it feel more like a 58, like a homage, slightly faux patina the handset and the indices, I think that would absolutely fly off the shelf. In actual fact, it wouldn't make the shelf. Well, there you go. How many channels do you know have reviewed a watch like this? It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much to Spencer at That Watch Guy London. I'll keep hold of this until he asks for it back. Maybe never. If you'd like a little bit more of the Mad Watch Collector, please join right there. Get some merch right there. Oh, yes. And if I've got you for a few more minutes, why don't you click this one? Oh, probably going to be a Tudor. I mean, I don't know what this is, but it's probably a Tudor watch. Go on, have a look at it. It's great. Go on, click it. Click it.